James Gunn just put out a video officially announcing the first section of his DCU. So let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your thoughts on the initial announcement of James Gunn's DCU. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Are you underwhelmed? What are you most excited about that's in there? What I'm gonna do is basically just play through the video and pause to talk about each of the things that's announced, kind of break it down, my thoughts on everything. So let's get started.
You know, our jobs, mine and Peter's, is to come in and make sure the DCU is connected in film, television, gaming, and animation. That the characters are consistent, played by the same actors, and it works within one story.
So right off the bat, this is really interesting to me because I was expecting film, TV, Slate, and how they kind of intertwine with one another, but he makes it clear they're also tying in animation as well as video games. And they want to have the same actors voicing the characters in all of it. So the person that's in the movie is also in the video game, is also in the animated film. And that's interesting. And I'm not quite sure exactly how that plays out because especially the last decade or so, they've been very prolific putting out animated films. Does that mean that's going to like slow down? Does that mean it's going to be more intertwined? Like exactly what that means, I'm not quite sure. And there were a couple animated projects announced in here. And there's a bunch of other animated projects that, separate from this, have been announced that he doesn't really address. So I'm not quite sure what to make of that exactly. And he doesn't talk about any video games in here, but he mentioned video games in that little segment. So what exactly does that mean? I'm not quite sure.
And if something is outside of that, like Matt Reeves' Batman or Todd Phillips' Joker or Teen Titans Go, that it is clearly labeled as DC Elseworlds, outside of the mainstream DCU continuity.
So right there, he answered one of the biggest questions I had going into this. Will they try and put Matt Reeves' Batman in the DCU? He makes it very clear. Matt Reeves' thing is Matt Reeves' thing. It's separate. It's by itself. He is doing his Batman thing. We love it. Go have fun with it. As well as Joker. I don't think anyone expected Joker to get intertwined into the DCU, but he's making it clear those are Elseworld. They're going to be labeled Elseworld. And then he singles out Teen Titans Go is also one of these projects that's clearly labeled Elseworld. But what are all these direct-to-video animated ones? How does that tie into it? Does that mean that the animated projects that he's about to announce are higher budget, higher profile? What exactly that means? Kind of fascinated to like, there's all these new questions that I had. There's so much in here, but I also have more questions leaving it in light of all the different things that DC has been doing throughout the years. There's even more things that could possibly tie into all this and have implications in light of what he keeps saying.
Now, Peter and I have gotten pretty lucky in terms of the 4 projects that are coming out over the next year.
So here he starts being real careful with his words and saying a whole lot of kind of nothing. Everything that he inherited is, of course, fantastic and fun, and he loves it because was he going to say something else besides that?
First, we have Shazam, Fury of the Gods. Shazam has always been off kind of in his own part of the DCU, so he connects very well.
Talks about Shazam. That's kind of its own little thing over here. And yeah, it's just kind of over here, so it doesn't really mess with anything. And it leads right into The Flash.
That moves directly into The Flash, a fantastic movie that I really love that resets the entire DC universe.
He says The Flash reboots the continuity, which we kind of already knew that. That's not really a surprise, but he says that. He says it right there. Flash reboots the continuity and says that leads right into Blue Beetle.
Then to move into Blue Beetle, a fantastic film about a kid who's a marvelous part of the DCU.
He says Blue Beetle, fantastic. That word that he kept repeating that feels like his filler, like I want to say something positive word, but I can't say something specific, so it's fantastic. Fits perfectly into the DCU. So he ties Blue Beetle into his continuity. So what that means is sequel's coming, that this is in its own way, like it's a holdover, but it fits in. Or if he's just using general language like, yeah, it fits in. Or it's standalone, but it can stand alone as its own little pocket thing. But he uses that language that fits right into the DCU, his thing. And he says, and that leads right into Aquaman.
And then into Aquaman 2, which leads directly into our next few projects.
He doesn't really say anything about Aquaman. which to many of us, Aquaman feels like the end of the DCEU. The end of the previous era comes with Aquaman 2. And obviously that's the thing that we're all thinking. Obviously that's a thing that he would be aware of. And he doesn't say that. He doesn't actually use the language that we're kind of thinking when it comes to that project. So fascinating what was and wasn't kind of said right there about Aquaman. Just kind of nothing about the end of the DCEU. And the previous Aquaman made over $1 billion. Like it might be the highest grossing DC film of all time. So it's like this huge deal in this one sense. And he's like, and then it leads into Aquaman 2. Move on. Then that leads into the stuff that we're actually really announcing.
Which leads directly into our next few projects, which I'm going to tell you about now. So Peter and I, along with a group of very talented writers, have started to map out an 8 to 10 year plan of what DC Studios will be in film, television, and gaming. This first chapter is called Gods and Monsters. Now this, what I'm about to tell you, is a part of the first chapter. It's not the entire first chapter.
So right here, what he says that they've been mapping out 8 to 10 years. This first part's called Gods and Monsters. That's kind of the thing that I feel like DC's been missing. And Zack Snyder kind of tried to do his version of it, but they never trusted him to let it play out. So I'm still skeptical as to whether Warner Brothers will let James Gunn let this play out if pieces they're not as well received as they're hoping for them to be received. That was the old regime, but there was a lot of DC regimes in a row there that seemed to have the exact same kind of problem of not sticking to anything, being scattershot. But the simple fact that they're thinking, this is the next decade, this is a plan that's going to go on for a while, that gets me excited. And that kind of explains why are we not bringing Henry Cavill in? Why are we kind of moving away from Gal Gadot? I don't know. I always get it wrong. Is it Dot or Doe? I don't always know. But Henry Cavill, I believe, turns 40 this year. You're starting a new continuity. You want to go for 10 years. Superman is a character that it's a lot trickier to look like Superman when you're 50 than when you're in your late 20s. You can kind of see where they're coming from on some of this. Same with, it's easier when you're in your late 20s versus when you're into your late 40s and have had many children. It starts getting trickier. And even in conversations that James Gunn previously had, like with David Bautista, about possibly playing Bane, and they'd been discussing that, and there's little rumors all throughout the years. And then just this past week or past couple days, Dave Bautista, while being interviewed about his new movie, kind of said, yeah, I've talked with James Gunn, and for years we were talking about me playing Bane, but they're looking to do this for the next 10 years. And I just don't know that when they're trying to do fresher, younger, thinking long term, I'm in my mid 50s now. It's already tough for me to still be as jacked as I've been. And they want to go for 10 more years. What am I going to be playing Bane when I'm 64? You know, like he has that kind of like, they're refreshing it. I don't think I'm the guy if you're going to reboot it, refresh it. And that applies also to these other actors that Henry Cavill, I love. I would have loved to get Man of Steel 2. Was so happy when 2 months ago they told us he was coming back, just to 2 weeks later say he's not coming back. I was so excited we're going to get that Man of Steel 2 that some of us have wanted for so long. But at the same time, do I want Man of Steel 2 more, or do I want a cohesive DC universe more? I want a DC cohesive universe more than I want Man of Steel 2. Is James Gunn the right guy to do that, to lead that? I'm not sure. We'll find out. I'm not cynical towards him. I'm not, James Gunn, really? He's a lot more versatile than people give him credit for. He's been writing a lot longer than people pay attention to. He did Scooby-Doo. He did Dawn of the Dead. He wrote for Troma. He's done more than just Guardians of the Galaxy and the Suicide Squad. And he's also not writing all of himself. And so I'm not expecting everything to feel like a James Gunn comedy film or anything like that. Is he the right guy? We'll find out. But I would rather have cohesive DC universe than Man of Steel 2. And if the cost is we lose Henry Cavill, which is heartbreaking for me, I don't blame James Gunn for that. I blame the last 9 years of people in charge of Warner Brothers not previously greenlighting Man of Steel 2 earlier, and they get to the point in time like, we're trying to move forward, and what's the best plan? Is the best plan to try and keep duct taping this thing before together, or do we just need to start over with something fresh and do it right from the beginning? Start with the 8 to 10 year plan. He says we're starting with the 8 to 10 year plan. That's what I like. That's what I want. So ultimately, that's the thing in there that is exciting to me. Unfortunately, it comes at the cost of some things that I also have really enjoyed and would like to see more of.
The first project is Creature Commandos. Creature Commandos is an animated series. I've written all the episodes. Something we're going to do that's a little bit different at DC is we're going to have characters move into animation, out of animation, usually having the same actor play their voice as who plays them in live action.
So here he starts to flesh out what exactly this kind of holistic approach looks like in terms of the animation, and even answer some questions I was alluding to before. I did watch this video before I started shooting this video, but this is where I'm kind of doing my deep dive, where I'm rewinding a little bit on it. It kind of answers some of the questions I had, where Creature Commandos, no clue who the characters are. You can just look at it and like feels a little bit like some of a Suicide Squad-esque project, but which he apparently likes that sort of thing. I have not read any Creature Commandos, not familiar with it at all, but it's TV animation, so we got an animated show, and he makes it clear this thing, the voices of the characters that appear in this are the same ones that will be in the movies. So we might have an animated character here, and then they might be in a movie, live action. We're just going to go back and forth. That's kind of fun. That's kind of interesting that they're looking to do that. Other thing he just kind of drops in there, I've written all the episodes. When? How prolific is this guy? How does this guy do all of this? What has he been doing recently? I don't know. He wrote, filmed all of Peacemaker, did Guardians of the Galaxy, happened to map out the entire DC slate while writing a Superman movie, and just kind of like sneaks in there. Oh yeah, and I wrote Creature Commandos. Like one of the more obscure things, definitely not high profile, definitely not going to be the one that gets the bazillion views. I just happen to do that in my free time. I happen to write the whole season of Creature Commandos. James Gunn.
The next project up is Waller. This is a story of Amanda Waller, played by Viola Davis. Viola Davis is going to team up with members of Team Peacemaker, and this is a story that's been created by Crystal Henry, who did Watchmen, and Jeremy Carver, who created the Doom Patrol. It is a fantastic story that's out of this world, and I can't wait for people to see it.
So, throughout this whole deal, he never mentions Peacemaker, the series, getting a season 2, but he mentioned characters from Peacemaker showing up in this show. So this feels like the follow-up to Peacemaker, while not being Peacemaker season 2 and not being something that he has written himself. He mentions the creators of Watchmen, as well as Doom Patrol being on the project. Once again, he declares it as fantastic, his go-to word for the thing that he wants to praise. This one, when he said fantastic, he got a big grin on his face, though. So this one had to have a little bit more weight to the fantastic on it. This is where all this starts getting tricky, because it's like, he's like, now we're going to announce all of our fresh new projects, and starts talking about it. And it's Viola Davis's Waller. It's Peacemaker characters. So the past continuity, and we're still talking about it in here. So that full reboot, that the Flash resets everything, still not really even clear exactly what that means. Because we're still continuing forward with some of these characters, but also clearly redoing a bunch of the other ones. So while getting a bunch of answers, there's still a bunch of like, what exactly is going on here?
Okay, next up is the big one, the true beginning of the DCU. This is called Superman Legacy. This is being written by me. I'm in the middle of it. I'm having a great time doing it. And Superman will be released into theaters July 11th, 2025.
Not too many details there. One super important detail. After saying those other things, all right, now we got our new things, and I've written them. Then he says the true beginning of the DCU. So there's the Blue Beetle. He'll be a nice addition to DCU. That's 2 years before the true beginning. And then he says, now we're going to talk about these other pieces of the DCU. Announces an animated show, announces a live action TV show. Then he says the true beginning of the DCU is Superman Legacy. I don't know what I'm supposed to make of Yeah, Blue Beetle, he's a nice addition to the DCU. 2 years later, here's the official beginning. What? What does that mean? What are you saying right now? How does this continuity work exactly? Because that is not clear whatsoever. But so doesn't really give us details, just says, I'm writing it, which we already knew. He's in the middle of writing it. It's called Superman Legacy. I'm down with it. Cool. Superman Legacy comes out July 2025. So 2.5 years out. In previous statements, he said he's not necessarily directing it. So I'm not expecting him to direct this film. Maybe he will, but I'm not expecting him to direct the film. He just absolutely is writing it. And all we know is a release date, a title, and this is the official beginning of the DCU.
Okay, the next thing is a big premiere HBO television series called Lanterns. This is a story of a couple of Green Lanterns, John Stewart and Hal Jordan, and we have a few other Lanterns peppered in there, but this is really a terrestrial-based TV show, which is almost like True Detective with a couple of Green Lanterns who are space cops watching over Precinct Earth. In it, they discover a terrifying mystery that ties into our larger story of the DCU.
Okay, so here's a cool one they've been talking about almost as long as I've had my YouTube channel. They've been trying to get a Green Lantern movie, TV show. They've always talked about it as a buddy cop type thing. And I mean, back 6 years ago, they announced in January of 2017, they were doing a buddy cop Green Lantern movie, kind of like this premise, and then it was going to be a TV show. And I mean, it's all along the way they've been talking about it. It looks like it's finally happening. And I think this sounds pretty cool to me, that Earth-based, we get 2 Green Lanterns, Hal Jordan and John Stewart, compares it to True Detective. And so that, like, if you're going to go like point of references, his point of references keep being these very mature adult HBO prestige television shows. So like, yeah, it's like this very serious crime show, except it's about lanterns protecting the Earth. And he says other lanterns will show up. So it's part of the big thing. Another thing I love in there is he says it's part of this mystery that ties into this bigger story that we're trying to tell with the DCU. Love that. Because there is this, it's not just a shared continuity. There's something bigger going on that pulls it all together. And through this TV show, we're going to reveal part of that. It ties into, like, he says, little details. We got this 8-year plan and everything ties together. There's a mystery that ties into the bigger picture. So an actual plan. We're building towards things that you want to see the different pieces so you can have the payoff when we get to the big thing and it happens. Love that. So for years, we've been talking about this Green Lantern movie, then TV show. Looks like it's happening. And I like what he's saying about it.
Next is a big movie called The Authority. The Authority is a passion project of mine. It's based on the marvelous Wildstorm characters we are now bringing into the DCU and will interact with all of our primary DCU characters. The Authority are a group of superheroes who think the world is broken and they want to fix it by any means necessary. I think it's a very different look at superheroes.
This one's kind of interesting to me because I don't know what the Authority is. I have not read, once again, these projects. And so we're kind of going through this, and he's announced several things in here that are like out there and like very much removed from the top tier A-list. We've got some Superman. He's about to mention some Batman. We got Green Lantern. But then also these ones that the mainstream haven't really heard of, that aren't really familiar with. And he said the Authority is a film. So doing a movie, not out of lanterns, that's going to be this mystery detective show set on Earth, but sci-fi. No. The Authority is getting the big movie. And so they're taking some of these chances, and you got to stop and think, when did Marvel do that? They establish their kind of core characters. They do the Avengers, and then they announce, we're going to do Guardians of the Galaxy. Who do they get? I guess he's right over here. James Gunn. So this is a guy that's able to kind of take wild out there characters that are not mainstream and make them very accessible. Now, notice what he didn't say in here, though. Who's writing it? Who's directing it? No information about a release date. No information about writer-director. Just a project he's very excited about of these obscure characters. So when you start getting into who, that matters a lot. But he does say, hey, these kind of new characters with a very different take on superheroes and how to save the world, they will interact with all of our primary main characters. If they're not their pocket deal, they will interact with the main people.
We're doing a television series called Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is the story of Paradise Island, usually known as Themyscira, which is the birthplace of Wonder Woman. It's almost like Game of Thrones with Westeros, but with all of the inhabitants of Paradise Island.
So much like when he was discussing Lanterns, he compares it to True Detective, like this prestige, very mature show. He starts talking about our Themyscira, our Paradise Island, compares it to Game of Thrones. So if you're trying to get the tone, the vibe of the DCU, looks like we're going mature, which DC's tended to do that. They kind of know Marvel has the family very broad, accessible to everyone. So DC's tended to go more mature. That's what they did in the last decade. And it looks like they're not changing that. They're continuing down that path with these comparisons that he's making. Seems that's the direction that he wants to take it. And I'm kind of fascinated by this one because obviously Themyscira, there's a deep, rich mythology there, a big history there, and wants to do a show that's about all of that with Game of Thrones as his point of reference. Oh, okay, let's go for it. If you're trying to build out a rich DC universe with a history to it that's cosmic and it goes back in time on the Earth, and he just says right there, we're going to do that. Paradise Island. We're going back. We're going to explore that history.
The introduction of the DCU's Batman is The Brave and the Bold. The Brave and the Bold is the story of Batman and his actual son, Damian Wayne. This is based on Grant Morrison's great comic book run. Damian Wayne is my favorite Robin. He's a little assassin who Batman tries to get in line. And so this is the story of the two of them and the beginning of sort of the Bat family in the DCU.
Along with Superman Legacy, this, of course, is going to be the other gigantic announcement in here that we've got a new Batman coming. So we're going to have two different Batman film continuities going, which it seems like they've been very fine with having competing continuities and trying to find a way to make it clear that that's Elseworld over here. Here's our proper continuity. But they, think about where things were at just in the last few years with Joker, Jared Leto appearing in Zack Snyder's Justice League, and then Barry Keoghan appearing in The Batman. 3 different movie Jokers all at the same time. So they're very comfortable with we'll just trust audience to figure it out. So 2 different Batman properties going at the exact same time. We are going to get that. They're not going to mess with what Matt Reeves is doing. They are going to have their own Batman launching in here. And that is very interesting to me that they're doing that on that level of 2 different Batman franchises. So you very much will have people do you like this one or this one more? Warner Brothers is wild. They do all this stuff that Disney would never do. They put out Zack Snyder's Justice League that make people repolarize the audiences, bring Zack Snyder back, let him do all of that stuff. They do these wild, crazy things. And now we're going to have 2 Batman franchises. So what did he actually say about it? It's Batman with Damian Wayne, which means you're not getting a young Batman. You're not getting an origin story in here. This is an established Batman who is old enough to have had a child with Talia that is old enough to be a Robin that he's working with. The child has already been an assassin trained by Ra's al Ghul. If you don't know the Damian Wayne story, I just kind of told you his background in very short, sloppy fashion. But so he's once again established in the role. Older, not old, but old enough to have had this take place. And my immediately thought when I heard all of this is I'm just disappointed that we've never really gotten a good Dick Grayson live action. Chris O'Donnell and Batman Forever and Batman Robin. There's something, but that's not a true version of it. And you think of how many Batman continuities we've had, all these different things they've done, and Dick Grayson and Bruce Wayne, that's a great father-son relationship there where they have their issues, and then Dick Grayson goes off to be Nightwing. And we're still not going to get it. We're still not going to get that progress, that growth, and we're just going to Damian Wayne. And I suppose it's potentially in here that you could still have Nightwing showing up and Dick Grayson as something already established. Timeline-wise, that's entirely possible. He says it's the introduction to the Bat family, so they're looking to do more here. So I'm disappointed in that. But the fact that they're doing Damian Wayne, that will inherently is very different from any Batman type story we've ever done before. There's such a richness to that. It's a different dynamic. Even, obviously it's going to be different from Joel Schumacher's Batman Forever, Batman and Robin, but it's a fresh new take on a character that we've seen many, many times before. I'm totally fine having a zillion Batman movies. Some people are more burnt out on that. This will be something fresh and different. If you haven't watched the DC films, animated films from the last decade, they very much play out this story across many, many films. And so if you haven't checked out my ranking, I've watched that whole continuity. I'll try to remember to put a link right up here of my talking about all of those. But if you want to be familiarized, you can either go read the Grant Morrison run, or you can watch the animated films from the last decade. Oh, I forgot to mention this. Once again, no writer, no director. Just said, this is the project we want to do. We want to do Damian Wayne, Bruce Wayne. That immediately lets you know an idea of where it's going. No reference to the talent that will be bringing this story to life.
Next up is a TV series called Booster Gold. Booster Gold is one of comics' really popular cult heroes. He is a fascinating guy. He's a loser from the future who uses future technology to come back to present day and become a superhero so that people will love him. It is basically the superhero story of imposter syndrome on an HBO Max series.
Of the TV shows mentioned in here, this is the one that I'm probably second most excited for. Booster Gold is just a fun, goofy character. And as he said, it's like imposter syndrome, and the nature of the character not being super high profile and with his personality lends himself, I think, for television really well. And so finally doing him in a proper universe that's part of the bigger picture, that seems like a lot of fun to me.
One of my favorite comic book series from last year was Tom King's run on Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. And so we're going to turn that into a big science fiction epic film. Now, Superman is a guy who was sent to Earth and raised by loving parents, whereas Supergirl in this story, she is a character who was raised on a chunk of Krypton. She watched everybody around her perish in some terrible way, so she's a much more jaded character.
So there's been discussions of a Supergirl movie for several years now, and now it's officially formally coming. And kind of the interesting thing on it is that it's pulling from the comic run from last year. So he's like, yeah, I love this comic from last year. We're making a movie out of it, which seems like a really fast turnaround because normally they kind of let they pick the stories that have been out there a little while that people have talked about. They've soaked a little bit into the popular culture before they adapt them into the movies. And he's like, hey, the Supergirl run from last year that no one in the mainstream is talking about. Yeah, well, that's the thing that we're going to do. We're going to adapt that one. The way he kind of talked about it, though, with the nature of the story and contrasting with Superman, that's what was interesting to me, though, we're going to do that optimistic, hopeful Superman raised by great parents, understanding responsibility, the power that he has. She's like raised on a rock, only seeing despair. So she has all the power, but without the proper parenting and guidance. I hear that and I go, oh, that's interesting. That's the contrast that makes for fun conflict and drama in a story of two characters that are kind of very similar. But you change that ingredient. Ma and Pa Kent makes all the difference as to how this Kryptonian turns out on Earth. So I actually dug that. Once again, no listing of director, writer for the project.
And that brings me to Swamp Thing, the last thing we're going to talk about, a very dark horror story in the origins of the monster who is Swamp Thing. And although it's totally outside of the rest of the DCU, it will still feed into the rest of the stories.
So this is another one that's kind of interesting to me because they just did the Swamp Thing TV show. I didn't watch it, but from everyone I heard from that did watch it, I only heard positive things about it. So that they're immediately kind of doing a new film version is interesting to me. Also, Swamp Thing originally made into a movie 40 years ago by Wes Craven. And before Wes Craven really kind of took off with Nightmare on Elm Street, before, the comic book movie took off, like a very early comic book movie was Wes Craven's Swamp Thing. And Swamp Thing's a character that had a TV show and had a run. So people are kind of aware of him, but he's never launched into that high profile A-list. So when he announces this is one of the films, once again, interesting to me, he says it's not part of the main DCEU, but it ties in. Once again, these little statements in there that he keeps making that I don't know what they mean. I don't know what to make of what you're saying when you phrase it the way that you have. It's not part of the main DCU, but it ties into things we're doing. What? What? Can you define what these things mean? What are you saying with all of this? So there's a lot of those things that are kind of tricky about the language that he uses.
Anyway, those are the stories that I can tell you about right now.
I want to pause even just on that one statement right there because immediately makes it clear they have other things in mind. And he says even of this first chapter, this isn't the full slate. This is just what they're talking about. There's a lot in there. So there's more in the first slate. Starts in 2025. We don't know how many years chapter 1 runs, but he announced we're doing Batman. No writer director. We're doing Supergirl. No writer director. We got Swamp Thing. No writer director. So a lot of things aren't mentioned in there. Doesn't mention Peacemaker season 2. Though I think elsewhere he said he's planning on doing Peacemaker season 2. How that ties in, I don't know. No mention of any sequels to the movies coming out this year. Probably means a little bit of something, but also could mean maybe they will, but they're further down the line and they're still trying to figure out how to sort through this mess. Maybe they want to see if Aquaman 2 is still going to make $1 billion with the ambiguity. I mean, he's trying to not undermine this next year's set of films. You're like, it's so excited that, we got these films that are great. A lot of us are feeling like it's tough to be really excited about Shazam 2, Flash, Blue Beetle, Aquaman 2, when it seems like they're not going anywhere. Yeah, obviously, I'll enjoy a movie in and of itself, but when before it even comes out, make it clear this isn't going anywhere, and it wasn't made to be the end of the story. You just kind of take some of the excitement away from it. And so maybe there's more to come, but you would have announced it now if you were trying to keep me to continue being excited about Aquaman and perceive of it differently. You handle that kind of in a different manner. So yeah, I think he's kind of handled a very tricky situation and answered a lot of my questions and said a lot of things that made me still confused as to exactly what's going on here.
One of the things that's very important for me in all of these movies and TV series is that the director's vision and the vision of the writers and all of the creators is unique and something special. Storytelling is always king. That's all that matters to us. And I want to be true to those stories. I want to be true to you guys and really give you something different than you've ever seen before.
So right there sounds like he's trying to make a distinction from Kevin Feige's MCU, where MCU runs on top. Story and MCU are on top. It's not really as much about the individual director's style. That's one of the big criticisms of the MCU, and a very fair criticism of the MCU, is that they kind of have to fit into that mold. There's a certain sameness to them, and certain directors are able to break through that a little bit more. James Gunn is one of the ones that broke through a little bit more. I think the Black Panther films, that they have kind of feel like their own thing, but a lot of the other ones, they start to kind of, a certain feels like that MCU factory filmmaking is a a certain flavor that you get to them. And he kind of makes it clear, we want the writers and directors' distinct, unique style to come forward in every project. Storytelling is king, so we have our plan, we have our group, but once we have the story, we want their style to be how it's packaged and communicated and brought to life. We have our plan, we have our story, that is king. And then they get to play with that, how they want to. And I think that's a good way to do it. Sounds good. We'll see how that plays out. With a lot of this, so I guess we'll see how it plays out. But there's a lot of promising things that he said with this. Even one of the big concerns people had, and I touched on this earlier, was, is it just going to feel like, a bunch of James Gunn projects, that he feels that just that flavor of his sense of humor, the crassness, the lowbrow stuff that he kind of does. Is it all going to feel like that? He's no, we want each director, each writer to bring their flavor to it. Okay, let's see how that works. And he's even addressing the criticism that some people have had. He probably should have even stated that a little bit more. It's like, and some people are wondering, like, is everything going to feel like a James Gunn project? And no, it's not. He probably should have just said that. He implied that with what he just said, but I would have recommended being a little bit more direct about it.
Anyway, thank you, everybody. I appreciate you watching. I hope this was exciting for you, because it's really exciting for me. And I can't wait to start to dive into these stories with you guys on this grand adventure. Thank you so much.
Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you want to see that ranking of the DC animated movies from the last decade, check it out right there. You can check out my ranking of all 45 DC films right down there. Thank you guys so much for watching. Keep talking movies too much.